My name's Natasha Todorovic-Cowan. I'm with Spiral Dynamics, and we help leaders up-level their leadership capacities by 50 to 300%, and teams run on all cylinders. Today, we're going to talk about what gets in the way of your leadership connecting with your team and getting your team to perform on all cylinders. Stay tuned. We've got some super duper cool secrets for you.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this particular episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, do you want to really up-level your leadership? Well, today we're going to be talking an insider look at the 5 levels of understanding human nature, particularly in regard to the resistance to change. Ooh, change. It's so hard. Or is it? No, maybe not. We'll find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside our Facebook group and our LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast in either of those platforms. If you're a new listener, a new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcast. And of course, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go over there and rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday. We go out all the way from Georgia to Colorado and everywhere in between. You can also check us out on Roku TV. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, or a leader in any capacity, you know, resistance is something every leader has to deal with, both within themselves and with those that they lead. But what if there is a system that you likely don't even know about yet, that's been around for a long time, that's got a ton of research that allows you to understand not only what changes really means to yourself, but what it means to others, and how you can best implement it in such a way that it will be embraced? Well, stay tuned, because that's what we're about to find out. Our guest on this particular episode is Natasha Todorovic-Cowan. Todorovic-Cowan, I get it, right? Todorovic-Cowan. She's the owner and proprietor of the proprietary Spiral Dynamics brand, tools, and programs. Natasha, her expertise include unraveling people's messes at the levels of organization. Her work is rooted in 70 years of research and application into organizations. Natasha has more than 25 years of experience applying her Spiral Dynamics assessments, tools, and programs to a broad range of industries, translated into 8 different languages. She and her team have impacted clients seeking to measure their cultural DNA leadership and change around the globe. Natasha is masterful at getting to the heart of what prevents leaders, teams, and organizations from achieving the results that they desire. With clients on 5 continents, she's the world's leading expert. Again, Natasha Todorovic-Cowan. I will get this right. I did get it right earlier. She's also the co-editor. It is. She's also the co-editor of Dr. Claire Graves' Levels of Human Existence, The Never-Ending Quest, and Exploring Human Nature. They co-authored The Human Spiral. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Natasha Todorovic-Cowan. Does anybody ever get it right first time, Natasha? No.
No. You know what? It sounds really hard, and then you start spelling it, and then once you spell it, and then you see it and hear it, then it's like, oh, okay, that's easier. But
Yeah.
no, it's a lot of O's, and it's a lot of this and that, and nobody gets it. It's fine.
Is it Russian?
It's Serbian.
Serbian.
I
Okay.
was born in a country that no longer exists, the former Yugoslavia, and it is pronounced either Todorovic or Todorovic.
Vich. Yeah. Vich.
Whichever you want to do is fine with me.
Yeah.
Natasha is better.
Yeah. In my family, on my mother's side, there is Russian, Lithuanian, and all the Vics and the Viches, right?
The Vics and the Viches.
Right, so we've got lots of those in my family too. Fortunately, I didn't get one of those as a name. So if I did, I'd be able to say your name at least, but nobody would say my name. So
yeah, you've got the perfect name.
Thank you. That's very kind. So where I like to always start the show is that it's easy for us to pick sort of media icons or people that are very familiar, like Einstein, or, but oftentimes I find that leaders are influenced and impacted by people that we wouldn't know. So who is someone that most people likely wouldn't know or wouldn't suspect who's been a major influence on your life?
Oh gosh, that would definitely be Chris Cowan. My husband, he wrote Spiral Dynamics. And I don't think I've ever, and we've had the gift to work with many geniuses around the world. I don't think I've ever met anybody so kind, so humble, so understated, and just pure genius. And he never would have admitted to that.
That's very cool. I mean, that's pretty cool that the person that you married is your greatest inspiration.
Yeah, and there's something that happens in relationship, and I think this is what leaders need to remember, is when you're in relationship with other, you are actually recoding their neurology. You're recoding almost their DNA. The way we treat one another allows either the fullest expression of the individual to emerge, or it crushes them inside. And there is nothing like leading with the heart. There is nothing like seeing deeply inside another and watering and sprinkling and fertilizing that nugget of that human potential and then having them blossom. And for me, that is truly the essence of leadership, and it happens in relationship.
And I couldn't agree more. One of my parts of my philosophy is that leadership is spelt with an R. It's relationship first. And what I say is that the people you've attracted into your life, and on varying degrees of intimacy, so whether that's a romantic partner or whether that's a business partner, it could be, or those that you are leading, you are always there to catalyze their soul. And what I say in that, what I mean by that is that the person who is going to have the most impact on you has the power to absolutely stifle your soul or to fertilize it and give it growth. And the person who can wound you the most is the person who can evolve you the most. And this is why I think that oftentimes in relationships, we don't pay enough attention going into a relationship. And by that, I mean, not only romantic, but any level, we go, oh, nice eyes, nice ass, I'm in.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice, but it ain't going to last.
That won't take you all the way.
It won't take you all the way, because at some point that asshole is going to drop. Those eyes are going to get baggy and wrinkly, and then you're going to be left with what? And this is the substance of all relationship, is to go below that. But, we do live in an increasingly visual world and increasingly driven by visuals. So it is a challenge. I get it.
And there's only so much surgery can do, and for only so long.
There is that point. So let's jump in here, because as you know, I am a huge fan of spiral dynamics and studied it many, many years ago and dug into it. But I know to this day, when I mention it, people are like, what the hell are you talking about? So let's start there, because 99.9% of people are not going to know what it is. Tell us what spiral dynamics is in the simplest way you can.
I'm going to make it very simple
Complex,
for you.
right.
It's a brand, and it's a brand that relates to goods and services. So Spiral Dynamics in terms of training and workshops, Spiral Dynamics in terms of our proprietary tool suite of assessments, and Spiral Dynamics in terms of consulting services.
But it's more than a brand. It's a way to understand how we work. It's a way to understand how we operate in the world as groups, as cultures, right? Let's just take people into that a little bit.
So if we got to when we were born, we're given a manual about how it was we were going to be able to walk this planet, in what worlds and with what kinds of people. Just imagine that's what you received, and that's what Spiral Dynamics is. So it was a guy by the name of Claire Graves back in the 50s, inspired by Maslow, watched Maslow get savaged on stage for not having data and research to back up his claims. And, you know, just imagine you're a young guy, you're watching your mentor, somebody you truly admire, great leader, absolutely savaged by people who shouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. And so Graves steps back, and at this time there are arguments about what is maturity, because we've been through these wars and the world is in chaos. And he sits back and says, you know what? I can gather the data that proves Maslow right, and I could do this research on maturity so that if we've got mature people, right, then mm-hmm. mature people will create mature society. And if we have mature society, then there won't be wars and there will be peace on earth and everything will be hunky-dory, right? And
fingers crossed.
Exactly. Well, and those were the debates, right? Sure. That if we could figure out maturity in the world of psychology, then we could truly crack the code and never have to have this war, this misery, this chaos ever again, right?
Right.
So that's what he started with. And what that led to was the research that got us to this approach of how do we lead? How do we prefer to be led? How do we manage? How do we prefer to be managed? How do we learn? How do we prefer to teach? How are we motivated? And how do we motivate? And more than that, how do we organize as a collection of humans? And all of that laid itself out in very predictable and measurable ways. Mind you, it wasn't that easy to figure out, right? You gathered the data and the research, and that took about 20, 30 years to get the pieces together and understand what it was, and then to try and communicate it. And of course, people didn't quite understand it. And when Chris came around, what Gray realized was he had somebody who truly mm-hmm. understood his work. And that's how we inherited the work. And that's how Chris ended up packaging it and turning it into a book. Well, Spiral Dynamics, the book, which communicates leadership and values and change, and, you know, this little book on what is human nature, the nature of human nature.
So there is great depth in this, and people need to understand that there is great depth.
Bless you.
Excuse me, I sneezed. So there is, as I said, there is great depth here, and there's a lot for people to unpack moving forward. So first of all, just to sort of backtrack so everybody grasps it. So most people are reasonably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is actually not 6, it's 8 for those people who are watching or listening. Then on top of that, you had Graves, who came in and did this phenomenal research and began to design how to gather the data to show maturity. Now, that's a place where I want to just pause for a moment and say, you know, because I think that one of the great misconceptions is maturity comes with age.
No. It depends on how you define maturity.
Right. So, you know, but that is how we, you know, we've looked at maturity chronologically. You know, you're now, you know, now listen, you're now 18, you're now a man. So, you know, well, I don't know about you, but when I was 18, I was 18 years old, but I was not very mature. And I would have argued, you know, I now can look back and say, way into my 30s, I wasn't a mature man. So, talk to us about understanding maturity through this model.
Right. So what you're talking about is biological maturity.
Yes.
Somebody at a certain age is
Yes.
supposedly more mature than somebody at a different age, right? And what we're talking about in a sense is both psychological and sociological maturity.
Yes.
So what Graves found was not quite what he was expecting, but what he found was different humans in different groupings, in different social systems are mature for those systems, right?
So how would that translate to our leader who's watching, listening, and saying, okay, how would I think about that in the context of my organization? I assume that my C-suite leaders are the most mature, and that my next level are not as mature, but that's not exactly true.
No. So here's the thing with leadership. Very often people think leadership is innate. People are born leaders. If you have positional power, you're a leader. And really in our approach, people vote with their engagement. They vote with where they put their energy. They vote with how they relate to somebody. And they can sit back and say all the right things, but never never go 110% all in doing everything they can. And the way a leader can up-level their leadership, and our clients up-level their leadership by 50 to 300% by knowing who it is that they are leading. And what we look at is this notion of congruent leadership. If I am a leader, and my people are, let's say, here, so I'm doing it visually. So let's pretend we're at a level, and it doesn't matter what level it is, right? We're at a level. And then I'm the leader, so I connect and hook up with them just a titch ahead of them, and they can see me, and they're inspired by me, and they want to follow, and they throw themselves all in, then I'm able to pull them along, right? People want their leader to be a pace car. And that is from the psychosocial perspective.
Right.
So leadership happens at, 4 different levels. Number one, it's at a content level, right? That's where we've got mission statements and value statements and belief statements and the behaviors of an organization that match up with the values and all of that. But that's just one piece. Another piece is the connection. And organizationally, roughly 33% of managers and leaders are appropriately, quote, empathetic. That means the balance are not connected to the people that they are supposedly supposed to be connecting with and leading.
Yes.
Then we have the piece, which is context. What is happening in a social, environmental series of what we call life conditions? We had a client, they were growing 10% a year. They thought that was fabulous. We did an analysis of the competitive landscape and found that their competitors were growing at 25% a year, right? Right, different, suddenly the context shifted.
Context has shifted, yeah.
Right? So a leader can tap into what's happening in that context. And there's a feedback, feed-forward mechanism with leaders and their teams, where teams are picking up on some of the signals in that context and environment. And they're putting these pieces together to figure out how do we best approach our clients, our market, new markets. And then we've got the piece that I think you're probably super, super familiar with, which is the conceptualizing, which is my level of coping, my levels of cognitive complexity, my abilities to solve certain problems according to this Gravesian system. And when that conceptualizing and that context come together, they come together to create a world. And that's where we get the worldviews and the colors of spiral dynamics, which are a shorthand for this multi-dimensional complex system. Is that making sense?
Yes, and let's unpack it a little bit, because there's a lot in there for somebody who's certainly not familiar with this. So let's give let's give some understanding to this. Because I think that one of the greatest challenges we have in our world today is that of context. I see this every day. I actually write about it, speak about it, and I say, I'm putting my hand up. I am a supporter of the Me Too movement. I have a hashtag on Twitter. It's me, he for she. I support women entirely. Do I condone believe women? No. I condone listen, because I don't think anybody should be believed across the board. It's foolish.
Wait.
Because there's a context piece.
So, would you believe all men?
No,
because they're men?
Absolutely not. And see, that's the point, right? I wouldn't believe it, but I would believe the truth, and I just need to find out what that is.
Hey,
so
I don't believe all women.
No, exactly, right? So there's a context. And do I think that women need to be heard a lot more? Absolutely. But there's a context, and we're seeing that now not only in the Me Too movement, but in the far left of the politically correct stuff, where comedians are being chastised for shit they said 10 years ago. They're comedians, and I think that if we start blocking that, we got a problem. But on top of that, in the context of what was said at the time, I don't think you can move the context to now. Right? So this is I think this is one of the highest levels I talk about, is one of the highest levels of developing your own emotional intelligence. And I talk about too, emotional maturity, is to look at the context in the context, not look at the context in your context. So I have to put, that is where empathy and compassion meet, is in a world of context. Is that a fair understanding of it from your point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what we're facing today are very different conditions even than a decade ago.
Absolutely.
And so Graves wrote in the context of a more male-dominated society.
Of course.
So a lot of his comments on maturity were he, right? And you can take offense with that, or you can say, you know what, let's look past some of what was common language at that time and look to the genius of this person. It wasn't that he was using language to exclude, it was what he knew.
Yeah, of course.
It's a process of developing and moving and evolving and shifting forward. And
but again, we're back into maturity, aren't we? Right?
Yeah.
So even context in itself, the very essence of it is, are you mature enough to understand that this was written at that time?
Well, and here's the thing, Dog, the reason context is so critical and the reason why it's so messy is because even in our own research, we have seen that the majority of humans are context blind. Yes. So we have to think of ourselves as we're in a fishbowl and we can't describe the water that we're swimming in because we are so accustomed to it. So when I get some of my elite clients to kind of pick out and start observing their own context, it's like their world opens up because they've never seen it that way.
Yeah, I agree. That's the work I love doing. Is then suddenly something goes, oh my God, really? Yeah, and the analogy I will give them is you've got a big boil right on the top of your head, but you cannot see it because you don't have any mirrors, and it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't hurt. But it's a big, nasty thing, red thing with a big green head on it. And everybody who comes up to you goes, and you think, why don't people like me? You give it a context that's got nothing to do with anything because you can't see it. And it's a really great example of how blind we are. And that's what I love about spiral dynamics. It gives us a way to look into and see ourselves, because content is the easiest piece.
Very easy.
Like we used to say, content is king. I think that's crap, right? Content is a wash. Content is ubiquitous everywhere. You can't get away from it. Connection, we need a heck of a lot more of. We need to become better, actually, really connecting with people and caring. We have to. Context is a maturing place. So again, there's an up-leveling of maturing into the context, and then we get to the conceptualization. Help us to unpack that part of it.
Well, I'm just going to take one quick step back into
Please.
context, which is, as a leader, if you're going to own your leadership, if you're going to own your maturity and you're going to own context, you need to understand that you are part of somebody else's context. So what you do
yes.
shapes them. What you do matters. What you say matters. And having the observational capacities to notice that people are recoiling because there's a boil on your head is something that we need to develop as leaders. And so conceptualizing.
Yeah, so that is a very good point. And oftentimes when we get it's very fascinating to me that we're often so lacking in self-awareness and yet so self-obsessed.
Yeah.
It's the double edge of that sword, right? So we need way more awareness, but we need to be less self-obsessed. And some people look down on navel gazing, as they used to call it back in the day. But it's like, no, I'm looking at myself so that I can be better in the world. I'm not looking at myself so I can exclude the world. And that is, again, part of that maturing piece. But so let's go now, because that's an important piece about understanding that you're having impact, you're having context in somebody else's life. Now let's go to this conceptualizing, because I think that this is where a lot of people get lost.
So we are now talking conceptualizing. So there are folks who are completely incapable of doing exactly what you're saying, which is that self-observing piece, which is stepping outside themselves, looking at themselves, behaving however they behave, thinking about their thinking, which we call metacognition, which takes a step back to see and notice and hear and lean into what it is that you're going on in your brain and your heart and your body. There are folks who can't do that, which is that whole I'm obsessed with self. That obsessed with self and being in self is a step ahead of the inability to actually pay attention to what's going on in me. And a lot of people can't do that. They just knee-jerk react to whatever's going on inside them. Right. So we've just talked right there about 3 different ways of conceptualizing the self.
So if I'm a leader of an organization, obviously, and again, now we're back to concepts and conceptualizing, but by my very nature as being a human, I am, people are so, well, you need to be less judgmental. And I always go, can you stop with this bullshit? And they go, what do you mean? You're a human. That's what we do. We judge, we assess. It's part of our nature. It's how we survive.
We evaluate.
Right. And we can do that. We can do that with a heck of a lot better discernment as opposed to being critical, which is different. Yeah. But it is our nature to judge, to observe, to assess. However, let's say I'm a leader and I look out at somebody who's in my team and I go, this person has the self-awareness of a sock, that they just don't seem to be able to do that. Is that, according to spiral dynamics and what you do you see that as well, just get rid of that person? Or do you see that as there's a way for that person to actually develop into having more self-awareness and maybe even hopefully having high levels of self-awareness?
So it depends on the person, and it depends on if the leader is right about that evaluation. Yeah. Because let's say we've got somebody who's really intimidated by their leader, right? So they can't perform because that person is there or they see them, so they shut down. And meanwhile, when the leader leaves the space, then they can start performing, but they're really quiet and they're really shy and they don't brag about themselves. They're going to be perceived in a very different way than, somebody who is actually very vocal, very look at me, but who might be incompetent, but they can toot their own, they can blow their own horn and say, I'm magnificent, right? So it's really, what we do is we do assessments, we look at who people are, we look at the match between leaders and followers, we look at those multiple levels of what are they doing, who are they being, how are they behaving, how are they connecting, and there's a lot we can do in all those spaces to help grow up or emerge or to align people with their innate talents. We worked with the team. A lot of the members of that team did not have tasks that were aligned for their zone of genius.
Right.
And once we took out the obstacles that were going on between the folks and got the leader aligned with his team, they became more self-managing. They required less babysitting, and they started trading off tasks that they hated and gave them to people who loved them. And then productivity improved because everybody was working in their zone of genius. And that liberated energy and excitement and happiness and joy and productivity and all of that cool stuff.
Yeah. So
it's, why is the person a wet sock?
yeah. So, you know, in the introduction to the show, I talked about change, and you know, you and I both know there's a whole bunch of reasons why people resist change. There's a basic reason, which is survival, and there's a feeling threatened by change. How does Spiral Dynamics address assisting people to embrace change? Because it is the thing, like, we know, I mean, using Maslow's work, you know, we want things to be the same, and we want stimulus. We want things to be different. And the degrees of that depend on are completely subjective. Some people love things to be very different a lot, but certain things to be absolutely the same. And some people, it's the other way around. They love most things to be absolutely the same and just a little bit of change. Talk to us about how Spiral Dynamics deals with that, because I am certain that we've got a lot of leaders in here who are dealing with that very issue, trying to get a new system implemented, trying to get everybody on board with a new purpose or a mission or vision or whatever it is.
So, as you've probably already stated previously, group and organizational change efforts, 70% of them fail, and 90% of individual change efforts fail.
Right.
And part of that has to do with misaligning the change to the individual or the group. Part of that has to do with not being aware of the change journey and getting the right pieces, the right stepping stones in that journey at the right time. And part of it simply has to do with shaking off habits that we've developed that at one point worked, we were successful with them, and now we are just entrenched because we're kind of like, you know, if we imagine our neurology like rivers, right? The melting snow has carved these rivers into us as habit, and now we're changing the river, right? That's going to take some effort.
Right.
So what we do we worked with an executive team. They wanted to roll out change across their organization. We did our Spiral Dynamics Change Readiness Index and revealed to them how they preferred to change. And they preferred giant, big leaps, right? So if you imagine a kangaroo taking big leaps over the road, right? That's how they like to do it. And they were frustrated because the people they were trying to drag along weren't coming along. Well, and I don't know if your listeners are going to be familiar with wombats, right? They're kind of like these, you know, little hedgehoggy-like things, but big. And apparently in Australia, if you drive over them with a truck, they get up, shake themselves off, and keep walking. But they take little steps.
Yeah, they're small and very robust. I've been on the road with wombats and kangaroos, and they're quite different, although they're both marsupials.
So imagine kangaroo change and imagine wombat change, right? So you're not going to get a kangaroo to change like a wombat. You're not going to get a wombat to jump change like a kangaroo. So it's got to be designed for the bite sizes that your human being can absorb. And if I am a 7-foot basketball player, you know, my size change when I take a bite out of that fork or spoon is going to be massive compared to a baby who wants a tiny size spoon.
Right.
So it's a matter of chunking and sequencing the change and delivering it in the way that your leaders and your teams and direct reports can bite off, chew, and absorb.
But the challenge with this, Natasha, is that and I hear this all the time because my work is very much about being subjectively aligned. Right. So how do I build rapport with this
Love that
person and
term.
deliver, so that so I can get their world right. However, the argument is we have 20,000 people, we have 2,000 people, we have 20 people. We don't have time to be subjective with each person and look at them and say, well, let's give it to them in that, we got to get this beast eaten, and we got to get this beast eaten by February. So how do we do that? Or by the end of the first quarter, or whatever it is the person says. So how do we, when this is organizational, when this is national, when this is a state government, when this is it could be a national government, it could be a body, it could be massive, it can be very small. Walk us through a little bit about understanding that, and maybe some tips on how to go there.
Well, if you're a leader and you're in charge of an organization, it's a heck of a lot easier than if you're a government, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the government supposedly serves the people, and you've got an
nice
entire
word,
nation.
Supposedly. Okay, we'll just underline that one.
Supposedly. And if they're not doing it, they eventually get booted out. But if you're a leader, sometimes going slow at the beginning enables us to go faster at the tail end, right? So if we just really strategically figure out where we starting from, where we going to, analyze very clearly for where we are. At the other end of it, if you've got a team or an organization that is change fatigued, that are dragging their heels, the change has tanked, that's going to cost a heck of a lot more than spending a little bit of time at the front end to figure out what really the heck is going on.
Yeah, I agree with that. And at the same time, understanding that there are some very high level entrepreneurs who listen to our show, they would say, but I'm a quick start.
Yep.
I'm a quick start. I get the idea.
Yep.
As I'm going to bed on Sunday night, I get up at 3 a.m. I start doing shit, and I make those things happen. And it's a whirlwind. What do you say to them?
Well, you've got to have those people around you that keep the wheels on the bus, right? Mm-hmm. And you can drive the bus down the road as fast as you can. It's not going to go faster if there are no wheels on it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we've got to pay attention to those fact finders and those follow throughs and make sure they get the wheels on the bus and the gas tank is full and the oil is in there, because otherwise we're going to be in the middle of the desert like Natasha was 2 weeks ago with the tires falling off the car. Right.
And at the same time, though, let's talk to their frustration with this.
Yeah.
Because they're going, okay, I get it. That makes sense. And at the same time, what do you want me to do? Put the brakes on myself? I have to stum? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to deal with this?
Right. And, we've got what we do with our assessments and our tools is we'll let you know who is ready to fly, 1,000 miles an hour towards that goal. Who's going to dig their heels in and say, heck no, until they're managed so that it makes sense to them. And then we just need to sometimes deliver the information in a way that they can receive it. And I love that you're using Kolbe, because you know that when you put together a team from a Kolbe perspective, from their doing perspective, things go faster. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, you might feel like, oh God, this is like going through quicksand. But once it opens up, it's faster than you imagined, because everybody's firing on all cylinders, doing what they need to do. They know their role, they're coordinating with one another, and they're getting stuff done. And that's the ultimate objective is to get that stuff done and to do it effectively.
In your article, the 5 levels of understanding, you report on the myth and the metaphor levels of understanding. Tell us a little bit more about what that means and how it's related to sort of non-intuitive issues that leaders face, so that the things that they wouldn't think of, in other words.
Right. So we were really struggling with this piece on why was it people just didn't get these colors and spiral dynamics. And the colors are essentially, how do you lead? Who are you leading? What are their mindsets? What are their worldviews? How are they motivated? Right.
Right.
So Chris gave them these very simple colors, and the idea was to just make things easier. And what we found with our research, watching what people were doing with the colors, is about 1 to 3% of the time they actually got the diagnosis right, which is super disturbing to us.
Sure.
We're like, how the heck? I mean, you could put a bullseye on the wall and throw a dart, and you're more likely to get the color right than observing and looking and all of that. So we did a piece of research, and what we realized was that people were just projecting. They were looking at the colors, they were seeing themselves in others,
Sure.
they were seeing their judgments in others. And just like you wouldn't say, doctor, I've got a headache, I believe it's a brain tumor, I want you to take it out, right? You wouldn't go to doctor and do that, but this is essentially what they were doing.
Sure.
Right? You need to do the testing. You need to dig under, because these are very deep, unconscious, poorly seen systems. So at the myth metaphor level, what people were doing was assigning their meaning to these systems, which wasn't the meaning that the research had shown as true about these systems. And that made it so people were misdiagnosing and misanalyzing. And what it showed us was we've got these cognitive biases that prevent us from deeply understanding and seeing others, their intentions, what their true come from is. And so many people feel misunderstood because they're not seen.
Yeah, I think it's one of the parts of the reason that we have a epidemic level of loneliness, is that people don't feel seen in a world where everybody is seen all the time, yet nobody is seen at any level of depth. And that's the deep craving. One of the things that, I think I was introduced to spiral dynamics, I think 1991, the first time when I came in, which is 100 years ago.
Let's just not count time, okay?
You came into it, really at its very early stages with Chris. Tell us about how you came into that world, because it's, we're talking about the actual thing itself, but let's hear a little bit about how it came to you and what became part of what you do.
Yeah, well, kind of at about that kind of 90 time, like you did. So it was early 90s. I was doing NLP training. It was totally opening up and rocking my world. I was doing business mentoring, and I shouldn't say mentoring. I was teaching executives how to speak in public, and got their level of platform skills to a professional level within probably 48 hours. And so I was using this as a tool to understand where they were coming from. And I was using it badly and poorly. I was at that myth metaphor level of understanding, not knowing that I didn't know. And I went and I got my MBA. And I mean, change has been near and dear to my heart for a very long time for many reasons. And that's when the Spiral Dynamics book came out. And I went through it and went, wow, there was so much there that I'd never really known, because in the world of NLP, it's framed as values. Values as contents, not value systems of these interconnected. Context meets conceptualizing produces values.
Right.
So I did the course. I was invited to become a partner in the organization. And the first 3 years were a complete radical shift of my thinking, my understanding, and my beingness as these different worlds opened up. We were doing a major reorg of a family-owned organization at that time. I was learning all of the systems viscerally, firsthand. Chris is mentoring me through how to build leaders, how to build teams, how to understand organizational culture, how to work with people through change. And we, over 4 years, took that family-owned company with the board of directors and team and senior execs, of course, through from family-owned to employee stock ownership. And when your job is at stake, and when you don't know whether the company's going to be sold or not, when you don't know who your next boss is going to be, when you don't know who and the power structure is going to be stripped out, and if you've taken sides, and we had 4 silos going on in that organization, you have to very rapidly get in touch with what's making people defensive, where will they open up, how can they connect, where leaders need to be placed so that this organization is healthy after the change, and so that people are still willing to work together after you've just unraveled everything that they've known. And the longest tenured employee there was, I think, 40 years.
Wow.
The average employee was 25. So that was a very rigid set of structures. And we had to find a CEO who would succeed in being the leader who could take this organization forward to its next best iteration without the family that was previously involved.
So, again, only if you're willing, are you willing to talk about how the brand was hijacked? Because the brand was hijacked and became associated to somebody. It wasn't Chris, it wasn't Claire Graves, it wasn't you. And it became associated to that person because they hijacked it.
Yeah. So when I was invited to be part of the National Value Center, there were 2 partners. So it was Chris Cowan, my husband. He wrote Spiral Dynamics, and it was our former business partner, Don Beck, who also appeared on the cover. Chris is the kind of person who, when I was in the company, probably in the 3rd month, he wrote an article. And he sent it over to me to have a look. And I'm like, why'd you put my name on it? And he said, well, you're our partner, and you're our partner. I wanted people to know that you are part of this organization. I said, but I didn't contribute anything. And he said, don't worry, you will, right? And in me, that made a commitment to give everything I had to make this work.
Right.
And so when we got into the negotiations of what my partner contributions and partnership would look like, I remember very clearly we were in a diner, the American diner in the middle of the Midwest, somewhere in Oklahoma, with these big red overstuffed seats of vinyl that your legs stick to when you're sitting there for too long. And so I was sitting between these 2 guys. I mean, I'm super excited because I'm becoming part of something I thought was going to be absolutely amazing. And we were talking about marketing. We were talking about our audience. We were talking about how to move things forward in my role and all of that. And I'm a bit of a smart ass, and I made a joke. And the joke was this. On Spiral, we've got one of the levels, which tends to attract people who are much more spiritual, who are much more open to more sort of metaphysical, new age kinds of values and beliefs. And, there's a whole psychology and reasoning behind that. But I said something to the effect of, there are literally millions of these people who are looking for something bigger, something higher, something to connect to. Let's give them a stairway to consciousness we'll call it the spiral, and they're going to be excited. And Chris laughed, and I laughed, and I thought it was kind of cute. And I looked over, and our former business partner wasn't laughing. I was like, okay, that was a bad joke. We just won't go there, right? What I didn't realize was that he'd taken that as a mission. And being the kind of person who wanted adoring fans and followers, and hooking into a new age movement and the leaders of a couple of new age movements, what he did was he promised them exactly those words, the stairway to heaven. And because people were hearing, higher consciousness is this ambiguous, very poorly defined thing, right? So what the world of higher consciousness got was a set of easy to understand stair steps. You learn rules, that's one thing. Then you get successful, that's another thing. And then you get in touch with your inner child, that's the next thing. Then you get systems, that's the next thing. And then you get higher consciousness. So easy, just take those steps and life will be grand. Right? But that's not the way the system works. But because of who he took it to, and because of how what they really needed to hear to fulfill what was missing inside, and to get that roadmap to what they considered success, a movement was born, and it was misinterpreted. It was used as a club to hit people over the head with, to make them conform. And it was not used in the way that we thought it should be, which is to open and evolve and to connect deeply and profoundly with what is alive and working and going on and animating human minds, human hearts, and human souls.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, when I look at it, I still remember some of the stuff from before, and like, I'd be like, oh, that person's a 7, because then the colors became numbers, and as I'm not trying to tell you, of course, very well, but I was like, oh, 7s, but I don't want to hang around with these 6s, and it became another form of judgment. Became very much a way to judge, and from somebody who also has some background in the psychology of marketing, it's very useful for that. It's like, okay, these people are wanting this, then you frame it in this language pattern, they get it. And as somebody who's NLP, like you too, it was like, oh, I could totally see this. But I think that this is always the challenge, and I don't care what it is, whether it's spiral dynamics, whether it's neurolinguistic programming, or whether it's any kind of philosophical thinking, is that it's a double-edged sword, and it can be used poorly or it can be used well. And I can remember when neurolinguistic programming was shunned. I can remember in the late 90s where it was considered a dark art of psychology, and because it was picked up by the seducer guys, and they were all using it, and they were doing horrible things with it, and it got a very, very bad rap because of that. Spiral dynamics became a wishy-washy spiritual judgmental process, and also got that. I still think that NLP is a brilliant set of tools, and I think that what I know of spiral dynamics, which is fractional compared to somebody like you, is like, that's another brilliant set of tools. I also am a highly trained hypnotherapist, and I think hypnotherapy is a spectacular tool, but all these things are tools in the toolbox.
Tools in the hands of somebody who can or can't use them. Dov, I had a client or a potential client who called, and the head of HR had worked at AT&T, remembered the work that Chris had done with them, and they called and they said, look, Natasha, and this is one of those companies that grows by acquisition. And they said, can you help us out? We had this approach, not ours, but we had this approach, and everybody was calling everybody else names. It was really fun at first, and then it was another color approach, and then it devolved into name calling. Right. And they said, we left a body count. And then we hired one of those prestigious, very well-known consulting firms. And they came in and they did their thing. And they said, and they left a body count. Is there a way we can do this so it works?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right, whether it's NLP, whether it's spiral dynamics, whether it's one of those a gazillion other tools, that's where the 5 levels of understanding comes in. We're at the shallow piece, then we get a little bit more depth if we pursue it. Usually people see it fail and they go, this stuff doesn't work. They don't consider that it was there, that there was more, or they don't know who to go to get the more. Or they don't know, they're not impatient, don't want to study it, or whatever variations, they just don't take it deeper. And the model level of understanding is really, how do I take this thing and as a model, know its strengths, know its weaknesses, and apply it properly to the right problem and the right thing.
Mm-hmm. This is a fascinating conversation. Clearly you and I could go way longer on this, but where I want to, we're getting close to the end, and I want to, I'm going to ask you to share in a little while how people can find out more about you, about Spiral Dynamics, and all your wonderful resources. But for now, tell me what it was like to be around Claire Graves.
Well, I was not around Claire Graves. Chris was. And I can tell you from Chris's perspective what that was like. And
by the way, as you're listening or seeing this, you may never have heard of Dr. Claire Graves. Claire Graves is a man, right? So, because the name's a bit of a throw off, but fascinating individual. So please continue.
So Claire Graves was a competitive person. He was a competitive golfer. They had Morgan trotters, so he was a horse person. And Chris would go up to the Graves farm, and he paid for his education by fixing fences and shoveling out the barn.
That's fascinating. When you would talk to Chris about Graves, what was his biggest sort of sense of that guy as a human being?
He was very practical. He was very measured. He was very disappointed in a sense, because he'd been working in a nest of behaviorists who couldn't see the value of what he was doing. So he had to do it undercover. So all of his research was done outside of the awareness of his colleagues. He was fairly independent. He did, whatever he damn well wanted.
Right.
And he was very precise and committed to his research. So he did this over decades without people at the university really knowing. He didn't really teach his approach. No. And then when he started to teach it, he realized people just didn't get it.
Right.
And that made him feel very disappointed.
Wow.
So it was kind of a hopeful, not so hopeful.
Sure.
He said to Chris, he said, people aren't asking the kinds of questions this stuff answers. It's not going to happen in my time, but it will probably happen in your time.
That's fascinating. I mean, even that statement there, people are not asking the kinds of questions that this can answer. I mean, I just love that right there for me, because I think everything is in the power of the question. I often say, if you're not getting the right answer, it's not because it's not out there, it's because you're asking the wrong question. And that's a discipline. It's the discipline to say, it's my frame. Again, we're back to context. It's my frame. The reason I'm not getting this answer is because I'm asking from the wrong place. Many years ago, my father attacked me on social media, a man who I had removed from my life 15 years before because he was so dysfunctional. And I was heartbroken and upset, and my wife held me while I wept. And then she said, and I kept saying, why would he do this? Why would he do this? And my wife just looked at me after, she gave me some time, and then she said, you're asking the wrong question. And I said, okay, what am I asking? She goes, you keep asking why would he do this? You haven't spoken to him in 15 years. Why would he do this? He has no reason. And she goes, you're asking the wrong question. I go, well, what's the right question? She goes, why wouldn't he? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, you removed him from your life because he was so unhealthy. He's just doing what he does. You're asking the wrong question. Why wouldn't he? And as soon as I went, why wouldn't he do this? Well, of course he would.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's who he is. And I think that a lot of the time we are asking the wrong question. And that's what I love about what you've put forward with Spiral Dynamics. Now, I know that you do this work with companies and organizations. If somebody wanted to become certified or understand how to use this for themselves or to help it with others or use it as a tool in their toolbox, do you offer that?
We do, but a lot of it has gone to much more of an application process because we've just found there are pieces that are fun and fabulous publicly, but the deeper stuff takes time. And I want to work with certain people on it. Mm-hmm. So it's on offer, and it's on offer for the right people and with the right relationship. I want to be the right mentor for the right people.
Right.
So we've got a fairly sophisticated advanced program. It could go for many years, but we've got one good solid year to get this stuff under your belt, to get certification in the tools. And then there's finesse and refinement over another few years. So yes, that is available. And we've also got public programs that we're just beginning to release now. So
wonderful. Wonderful.
Your listeners, for those who are aware of Spiral Dynamics, might not know that Chris passed away a few years ago. We were, even the week before he died, angsting over that piece of who gets it and who doesn't, and how we should deliver in a way that people can truly be positively impacted by it rather than damaged by it. Yeah. And so I think I've cracked that code, and the new stuff is coming.
So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to tell us where people can find out more about that. But before we do that, what I want to ask you is, I always like to sort of finish up my show by asking, what is one piece of rock solid practical advice you would like, or practical guidance you would like to offer to our listeners, to our viewers, in the context of what it is you've been talking about? What's the one thing you would say to them, go do this today, so that you can get a sense of whether it's the 4 levels or whatever it is?
The one thing I wish everybody had when they came to us is that piece of connecting, the ability to listen deeply, to hear deeply, to reflect another's experience so that they say, wow, you got me. And if you can do that, then this is probably something that you'll be successful with.
So what's the piece of practical advice you would ask them to go away and practice or do so that they can go, okay, I can go away and do that? What would it be?
All right, very simple formula. You feel blank because blank. You feel satisfied because we've had just an amazing connection during this interview. I feel happy because this has really been an enjoyable experience with you, Dov, right? That one piece, you feel blank because blank. If you get the emotion and get the right emotion and you get the content, then you'll be making magic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natasha. This has been a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for your time. Again, please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you, about Spiral Dynamics, and about all the wonderful resources you have, including, of course, your books.
You can go to www.spiraldynamics, that's SPIRALDYNAMICS.org or .com.
Thank you. So spiraldynamics.com or spiraldynamics.org. Is that right?
You got it.
Fantastic. And of course, we will make sure that that is there in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for your time, Natasha. I really appreciate it. It's been a joy, a pleasure. And I am going to really encourage you to get over there and sort of make some inquiries. Take a look at this, because It is a profound set of tools that I highly recommend. And of course, you can chat about this show or any past episodes by going and looking on Facebook or on LinkedIn to our groups and just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. Remember, the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies in the world are spending a fortune training, developing and attracting top talent, only to have them leave before they get a chance to get their ROI. If you're sick of that and you want to really get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsell authenticity. And remember, you can also stop by the Matrix. Just go to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W. Matrix, like the movie, fullmontyleadership.com, and you get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's absolutely free to you. To find out more about hiring me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization, simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about your levels of understanding. Do you really get to connect? Have you connected? Have you really built that connection? Do you understand what your content is? Have you considered not only your own, but other people's context and maybe your blindness to it? And how are you conceptualizing the way other people think and are? Open yourself up. It's a big world out there. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.